Los Angeles, a city known to the world for its palm trees, movie stars, and golden sunsets. But for decades, a very different story has been unfolding in neighborhoods far from Hollywood Boulevard. It's late at night in South Central Los Angeles in the late 1980s. A car slowly drives down a residential street. Inside the car, young men in their teens and 20s hold pistols and shotguns. On the sidewalk, another group stands in front of a house, laughing, drinking, trying to forget how dangerous their world has become. The car window rolls down. Several people shout. Then gunshots ring out. When the smoke cleared, the shooters were gone. The victims were bleeding, and by morning, the neighborhood was talking about two names: Crips and Bloods. This is the true story of how two street gangs, born just a few miles apart, became symbols of American gang violence, fueled a war that claimed thousands of lives, and still cast a shadow over Los Angeles today. After World War II, Los Angeles attracted tens of thousands of black families from the American South. They fled discrimination and racial violence in search of work and a better life. What they found was a different kind of barrier. Housing segregation confined black residents mostly to South Central Los Angeles and surrounding neighborhoods. Industrial jobs began to disappear. Schools were underfunded. Police-community relations were tense and often violent. By the late 1960s, civil rights and black power movements had spawned groups like the Black Panther Party, which sought to organize political power, self-defense, and community programs. However, intense law enforcement pressure, internal conflicts, and targeted FBI operations weakened or destroyed most of these political organizations. In this vacuum, where poverty increased, legitimate opportunities diminished, and deep mistrust existed between young people and the state, something else emerged. Street gangs were not new to Los Angeles. For decades, there had been smaller neighborhood groups defending their neighborhoods and sometimes fighting each other. But what was about to emerge would be different in scale, identity, and impact. Most historians say the Crips originated in the back alleys of South Los Angeles in 1969. A young man named Raymond Washington, who grew up near Fremont High School, began forming a local gang of tough young men. Around the same time, another young man with a fearsome reputation, Stanley "Tookie" Williams, was forming his own crew around Western Avenue. Although there are different versions of the first story, the most widely accepted one is this. Raymond and Tookie decided to merge their groups into a more powerful gang. They wanted to rule over other gangs in the neighborhood, show their power on the streets, and, in their own words, protect themselves and their community. However, this protection quickly turned into intimidation and violence against the very people they claimed to defend. At first, they called themselves Cribs. This was a reference to how young most of their members were. Over time, the name changed to Crips. No one can say for sure exactly how or when the name changed. Some say it came from Crips because members carried canes like pimps, while others claim it evolved from Crip. However, one thing was clear in the early 1970s. A new and aggressive gang alliance was spreading through South Central. Crips gangs began to emerge in different neighborhoods. Each was semi-independent, but they were connected by their names, reputations, and shared enemies. Members began to favor the color blue, taken from local school colors and increasingly adopted as the gang's symbol. For the smaller neighborhood gangs that refused to join, the arrival of the Crips was intimidating. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and less organized, and some decided to fight back. In the early 1970s, many independent gangs in Los Angeles were under attack from the rapidly growing Crips. One such neighborhood was Compton, particularly around Peru Street. A gang called the Peru Street Boys, led by figures like Sylvester Puddin' Scott and Benson Owens, refused to join the Crips. After violent clashes with Crip members, they and other non-Crip gangs began to band together for self-defense. This loose alliance soon expanded to include other groups such as the Brims and Denver Lanes. These gangs remained local and independent, but they had one important thing in common. They were all enemies of the Crips. Over time, they collectively began to identify themselves as Bloods. While there are different accounts of the origin of the name, one explanation is that it came from friendly street slang where they referred to each other as Blood, which then evolved into a group identity. Unlike the Crips' blue color, they adopted red as a way to show unity against a larger enemy. By the mid-1970s, there were two major gang alliances in Los Angeles. The Crips, larger, more dominant, and spread across many neighborhoods. The Bloods, smaller but increasingly organized, united in opposition. What began as local turf disputes was turning into one of the most notorious gang rivalries in modern history. As the 1970s progressed, violence between the Crips and Bloods escalated. It is difficult to determine exact figures. It is known that gang violence was underreported and miscategorized, but researchers and law enforcement agree on one thing. By the mid-1970s, conflicts between the Crips and Bloods accounted for a large portion of gang-related murders in South Los Angeles. Drive-by shootings, beatings, retaliatory murders, and intimidation became part of daily life in many neighborhoods. Young people, sometimes barely out of adolescence, were pushed or pulled into gang life by a mix of fear, loyalty, the need for protection, and a lack of other options. The line between us and them was simple but deadly. Blue and red. Crips and Bloods. While the stories focused on gang members themselves, those who suffered most were often bystanders. Families living on the streets, parents who lost their children, kids who learned to hit the ground before they learned arithmetic. Meanwhile, larger societal forces were making everything worse. Factories that once provided jobs continued to close. Heroin and PCP had brought addiction and crime into many homes. And then, in the 1980s, something emerged that would change the streets forever: crack cocaine. In the early 1980s, crack cocaine, a more affordable and drinkable form of cocaine, spread to urban neighborhoods across the United States, including South Central Los Angeles. It was incredibly addictive and easy to transport and sell in small quantities. For gangs like the Crips and Bloods, crack was not just another drug. It was an economic revolution. Instead of relying on petty crimes, robberies, and local jobs, gang groups could now control lucrative open-air drug markets on street corners and in housing projects. A single block could generate thousands of dollars in profit each week, or even each day, depending on location and volume. The result was fierce competition. Crip gangs fought Blood gangs for control of certain corners and apartment blocks. Blood gangs clashed among themselves. Crip gangs attacked other Crip gangs. The Crips and Bloods war was never a simple two-sided conflict. It was a fragmented network of local wars, each with its own unique stories, grudges, and tragedies. At the same time, authorities responded with increasingly aggressive tactics, specialized gang units, harsh penalties, and an expanding war on drugs. Many gang members were incarcerated for long periods. However, critics argued that mass incarceration removed people from communities without addressing underlying issues like poverty and lack of opportunity. In prisons, Crip and Blood identities became even more pronounced. Groups from different cities and states mixed together, spread their reputations, and sometimes formed new alliances and rivalries behind bars. And while all this was happening, the rest of America was learning a new vocabulary. Drive-by, gangbanger, Crips and Bloods. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Crips and Bloods were no longer just local gangs. They had become national symbols. News broadcasts showed footage of yellow police tape, crying mothers, and shell casings on cracked sidewalks. Documentaries and talk shows debated whether gangs were super predators or the product of systemic neglect. At the same time, a new wave of West Coast hip-hop emerged from the same neighborhoods. Rappers like NWA, Ice-T, and later Snoop Dogg and DJ Quick referenced gang life, police brutality, and the realities of South Central Los Angeles. Some were affiliated with Crip or Blood neighborhoods. Others were simply observers, telling the stories they saw. Hollywood noticed too. Films like Colors and later Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society brought stylized versions of the Crip Blood world to cinema screens. This had a double effect. On one hand, it drew attention to real problems: police violence, unemployment, the impact of drugs, the sense of being trapped in certain zip codes. On the other hand, it sometimes romanticized or exaggerated gang culture, turning it into an image to be copied or consumed. In cities far from Los Angeles, young people began claiming Crip or Blood identity based purely on music, movies, and fashion. The names that had started on a few streets in South Central were now spreading across the United States and even into other countries. On March 3, 1991, a black motorist named Rodney King was brutally beaten by LAPD officers after a high-speed chase. The beating was caught on videotape and broadcast across the country. When a mostly white jury acquitted the officers in April 1992, Los Angeles erupted. For days, parts of the city were on fire. Stores were looted. Buildings burned. Dozens of people were killed. The National Guard patrolled the streets. In the middle of this chaos, something remarkable happened in some neighborhoods. Rival Crip and Blood sets in the Watts area negotiated a peace agreement, often called the Watts Truce. Leaders from different projects, including Grape Street Crips, Bounty Hunter Bloods, and others, met to agree on rules to reduce violence between them. The truce had practical elements. No random shootings, no violence at community events, attempts to resolve conflicts without killing. In the years immediately after, some studies showed a significant drop in gang-related homicides in the areas where the truce held. It did not end all violence, and in some places it eventually broke down. But it proved something important. Even in the middle of a war that had lasted nearly 2 decades, there were people on both sides who wanted peace and were willing to risk their own status to get it. By the mid-1990s, the Crips Bloods conflict and the many internal wars within each alliance had left deep scars. Exact death tolls vary by source, but police and researchers estimate that thousands of people in Los Angeles alone died in gang-related murders over several decades. One analysis linked nearly 20,000 deaths in Los Angeles to gang conflicts involving these and other groups over a roughly 30-year period, especially in the early 1990s when homicides peaked. Behind every statistic, a teenager who never reached adulthood, a parent who buried a child, a community that learned to live with trauma. Entire generations grew up navigating invisible borders, where you could walk, what color you could wear, which friends you could visit. In some neighborhoods, crossing a single street could get you killed. At the same time, heavy-handed law enforcement responses filled prisons with young men, often for long sentences. Some truly dangerous people were removed from the streets, but many others were non-violent or low-level participants, swept up in wide dragnets and mandatory sentencing laws. The long-term results included broken families, more economic instability, and a cycle of mistrust between residents and the state. The war between blue and red was never just about colors. It was about history, policy, poverty, and power. While Los Angeles remained the symbolic heart of the Crips and Bloods, the names and sets spread far beyond California. By the 1990s and 2000s, law enforcement agencies reported Crip and Blood sets in dozens of U.S. states, and even in countries like Canada and Belize, often adapted to local conditions and mixed with existing gang structures. In some cities, these new sets were started by people who had moved from Los Angeles, bringing their affiliations with them. In others, young people simply adopted the names, colors, and symbols from music and media, sometimes without any direct link to LA at all. This franchising of gang identity made it even harder to talk about the Crips and Bloods as single, unified organizations. In reality, they were and are loosely connected networks of sets, each with its own leadership, rules, enemies, and history. When we say Crips versus Bloods, we're not talking about a single organized war, like two armies on a battlefield. We're talking about hundreds of overlapping conflicts, some deeply personal, others tied to territory or drug markets, all wrapped up in two powerful brand names. From the 2000s onward, gang-related homicide rates in Los Angeles gradually declined compared to their early 1990s peak. The reasons are complex. Changes in policing strategies, demographic shifts, community organizations, and the simple fact that many of the most violent actors were either imprisoned or dead. But lower numbers did not mean the gangs had vanished. Crip and Blood sets continue to exist, recruit, and commit crimes. Some diversified their activities beyond drugs. Others stayed involved in narcotics, fraud, and extortion. At the same time, there was growing recognition, both inside and outside these communities, that endless retaliation was not a future. Former gang members, local activists, churches, and non-profits worked on truces, job programs, trauma counseling, and re-entry support for people leaving prison. Popular culture also began to shift. Some artists who had once described or even embraced gang culture started to speak more openly about its costs and the desire for peace. one symbolic moment came decades after the first Watts truce. On June 19, 2024, Juneteenth, a holiday marking the end of slavery in the United States, the rapper Kendrick Lamar, himself from Compton, brought rival leaders and members from Blood, Crip, and Pyru sets on stage during a major concert in Inglewood, Los Angeles. The image of historically opposed gangs standing together in front of tens of thousands of people was powerful. A moment of public unity in a city with a long history of gang war. Veteran peace workers saw this not as a magical solution, but as part of a longer line of efforts, from the 1992 truce to countless local neighborhood agreements, to replace revenge with something else. Real peace is fragile. Ceasefires can be broken. Old grudges can return with a single shooting. No concert or treaty can erase decades of pain. But each attempt sends a message. The story doesn't have to end the way it began. It's easy, from a distance, to reduce the Crips and Bloods to just colors, names, and headlines. But if you spend time listening to people who grew up in these neighborhoods, former gang members, mothers, teachers, outreach workers, a more complicated picture emerges. Many gang members joined when they were still kids. Some were born into families where older brothers, cousins, or even parents were already involved. Others joined because they truly believed it was the only way to survive. Refusing could mean being targeted by both gangs and enemies. None of this excuses the violence, the extortion, the destruction. But it does remind us that these aren't movie villains. They are human beings shaped by structural racism, economic exclusion, over-policing and under-protection, trauma passed from one generation to the next. The Crips and Bloods are both cause and symptom. They make neighborhoods more dangerous, but they were also born from neighborhoods that were already abandoned in many ways. When we tell the story of the 40-year war between these gangs, we're also telling the story of what happens when a society decides some areas and some people are expendable. Today, the Crips and Bloods still exist. Their numbers, territories, and level of activity vary by city and region. Some sets are deeply involved in serious violent crime. Others are smaller, more symbolic, or in transition as older members age out and younger generations choose different paths. In Los Angeles, the birthplace of both alliances, the landscape looks different than it did in the 1980s or 1990s. Crime patterns have changed. Neighborhoods have gentrified. Social media has altered how conflicts start, spread, and sometimes get resolved. But the legacy of those decades is still visible in the memories of people who lost loved ones, in the mistrust between some communities and institutions, and in the ongoing struggle to create real opportunities for young people so that gangs are no longer seen as the only way to gain respect, protection, or income. The story of the Crips and Bloods is not simply a story about gangsters. It is a story about America, a story about race, power, economics, policing, policy, and culture colliding in specific neighborhoods and leaving scars that last generations. When we say Crips versus Bloods, we often imagine an endless loop of revenge. Blue and red chasing each other through the streets of Los Angeles. But maybe the more important questions are, what created the conditions for these gangs to form in the first place? Why were some neighborhoods flooded with drugs and denied investment for decades? Who benefits when the only options presented to young people are prison, poverty, or the gang? As long as those deeper questions remain unanswered, new conflicts can always rise to replace the old ones, even if the names and colors change. The Crips and the Bloods began as small neighborhood gangs in Los Angeles. They became global symbols of gang warfare. And now, decades later, their story forces us to confront a brutal truth. If we don't change the world that produced them, we may keep changing the names of gangs, but never the outcome of the war.